So good morning, everyone. I'm Dael Williamson, one of the CTOs at Databricks. There aren't an army of us. There's only really three. And this is my compadre who's flown in from Seattle, Robin.
The American on the stage, yeah. So Robin Sutara, I'm the field CEO at Databricks. As Dael mentioned, there's only a few of us that cover the globe. I used to be based out of London, but now I'm based out of the US, out of the Seattle area. Although I'm still in London every other month. So if you miss me, I will be back and more than happy to have a conversation. But Dael and I usually tag team a lot on these sort of sessions because what we want to do is provide you a global view of what we're seeing across our 12,000 Databricks customers when it comes to the latest technologies, what they're doing, what they're using. I know several years ago, we all, maybe for a bit of context, so in our current role, as part of this advisory position that we provide to executives across our customers, we also have very different, unique backgrounds that we bring and perspectives that we bring. So by education, I'm an intellectual property attorney who got into technology as part of my stint in the US Army, where I worked on Apache helicopters on the DMZ in Korea. So probably the least traditional path that you would ever take to get into tech. But I do find it's very helpful. One, because every organization feels like I'm back on the DMZ when we're having these IP and AI conversations. But the other thing is there is a lot of concern about regulatory requirements, legislative requirements, et cetera. So we'll cover a little bit of that today as we talk about what we're seeing in the agentic space. My counterpart, Dael, I'll let Dael introduce himself because he is probably the flip side of my yin to his yang.
So I fit into the Databricks DNA a lot simply because I am an academic. I've got a biochemistry background. Our founders are PhDs, so we love that kind of scientific debate and things. I also have a very full stack engineering background, so I like to tinker, like to get under the hood of things. I've had a very good opportunity the last few months because contrary to what you may believe, this has been replaced with metal over the last 2 months. So I'm actually pretty good, given the fact that this is all titanium hip. But it's meant I've had 6 months of being grounded, where I'm legally, according to our insurance, not allowed to fly. So I've had a wonderful 6 months of just playing around under the hood of the tech. And we want to contrast the view on hands-on, like almost forward-deployed leadership, and like getting under the hood of things and really coding and figuring out how AI works and how agents work and what these things actually do and how rubbish they can be at times. Contrast with all the litigious aspects that Robin sees when she practically lives on an airplane.
I was going to say, Dael's been home for the last 6 months. I have been in an airport lounge or on a plane for the last 6 months. So we're hoping we can give you a pretty good perspective on sort of the academic perspective that you're hearing versus the reality of what's happening inside the field. Because I have to admit, when we were at Big Data London, it really was all about ChatGPT, large language models. We're going to do prompt engineering. All of our roles are going away. We're going to solve everything via these natural language interfaces. No, we need our own data. Let's think about RAG. How are we going to do that? Oh, it's too expensive. Of your organization. The problem is that that is not the reality for most organizations. And so I think we'll start with Dael covering a little bit of what, and by the way, these will be the least dense slides. There is no reason to take pictures of but what is sort of the perspective when we think about the risks versus the benefits of the technology, people, and process as we go into this agentic sort of age? So because you have been so hands-on keyboard, I'm still trying to vibe code my first app from the airport lounge connectivity issues, but I would love your perspective on what you are seeing as you actually have been building out some of these agentic applications inside of Databricks and what you're seeing with customers as well.
Cool. So just for the audience, I don't want everyone to be confused like everyone is when it comes to the definition of a data product. So let's define an agent as we see it. So we see an agent being a unit autonomously having agency over a task. Okay, task being the sort of unit of measure that we're trying to kind of correlate. the sort of per token metrics are very weird. So we've kind of correlated that to more of a per task metric because it's more tangible. And one of the things we've been trying to do is figure out, like, can these agents help us to compress time? That, I think, is their ultimate initial superpower. So can we compress time where we're doing really dumb things and repetitive things? Now, lots of people will be talking about this whole probabilistic versus deterministic. Now, the funny thing is, we're really struggling with this reality. Like, most of the algorithms people use and have used are very deterministic in nature. So banks are like freaking out at the fact that you get different answers every time. One of the things, if you use one of these sort of free code agents, we use Glean internally. It's just easy to get people kind of riled up on how to build agents, how to chain them together, how to do different things, but you get different answers every time. It doesn't matter how well you build this thing, the answer is going to be different every time. So that's a new kind of mental model. Ironically, we struggle so much with this, but every human in this audience is a probabilistic system. So I don't know why we struggle so much with the fact that we get different answers. The fortunate thing about agents is they don't drink, they don't come in with hangovers. There's a whole lot of things that we already sort of take for granted. So we've been borrowing from some of the HR-related areas. So performance management, big thing. You know, how do we get the right behaviors? How do we get the right incentives? Evals has turned out to be the most important thing that we have focused on. For those of you who didn't watch the press last week, Databricks decided to break the alphabet and raise a Series K. One of the major reasons for that is to fund these AI and application kind of build-outs and the resourcing for how we can get people to help customers to do this really well. The first problem we are fundamentally trying to solve is how do we make building evals really easy? Now, having grown up in the software engineering world, this is actually quite similar to TDD and BDD. So initially with sort of software engineering, we had waterfall, and then we had TDD, BDD. I loved it when we could actually do automated testing. I hated QAs. QAs used to annoy the shit out of me. Now I could actually write tests, I could run them through, I could do integration, I could automate the testing, I could actually ship code to production hundreds of times a day. That is not actually what's happening here in Agentic, because this stuff, it's not like you can write an algorithm, shove it into a mainframe system and leave it for 40 years and forget about it, and then when suddenly realize there's a problem when people retire. So the arc that we're going through in Agentic happened over 30 years in software. We're now going through this, and we haven't even solved problems on how do we test data quality properly? How do we do data ops properly? And in order to do real good agentic sort of system development and application development, we're finding that we actually have to solve the data problem too. So we're solving these two big problems, and we've only done it over 3 years. So we know evals, based on former experience, is going to be massively important. We know tracing is going to be massively important. We know versioning is going to be massively important. And we also know that there are sort of certain primitives that help to stabilize. Long-term memory is still a problem. So these are all real opportunities, but they're also the risks of running too fast with building these systems. The benefits, though, is we are getting people that can do really amazing things really fast. The funny part, and this is almost speaking to your passion area, is we then hit ourselves against the organization. So we will create high-performing groups, high-performing teams. We will solve things that fundamentally were very hard to solve, and then there's an immune response. There's an immune response, and this is within a data company. 2/3 of the company at Databricks don't use AI every day. Do you know that?
No, I'm not surprised. Michael, yeah, we'll talk a little bit about how do you measure AI enablement, but how many in the audience are actually using agents inside your organization today? How many of you would say it's better, more risk versus, how many of you would say it's a bigger benefit than it is a risk? I think that's what we actually see across many organizations. I know we read the MIT study that with agentic systems, 95% of these projects within organizations are failing. Interestingly, I was on site with a big semiconductor manufacturing company on the West Coast when that study came out, and they were providing some insight to say they didn't believe that number because they felt like lots of organizations are actually successfully pushing out agentic systems inside their organization. But why should I tell you about it? Because I'm going to lose my competitive advantage. We're all using sort of the same technologies and trying to get there. So they actually felt like the ecosystem is much further along. And I have to admit, almost every customer I speak with, reminder, I'm on a plane 320 days a year, is using some level of agentic systems within their ecosystem. So we have some great customer examples, Flow Health being, I think, one of the ones that we were just talking about this morning. Women's health application providing hyper-personalized agentic medical advice to their users. And if you think about, I mean, how many of you would think health would be the one that you would stay away from because of the risk that that represents? If you think about giving advice there. And so for lots of organizations, as they think about the technical platform that they're building out to be able to support that, it's not just the value add that you're bringing to the organization, but you also have to think about the regulatory and compliance requirements around this. And I always find it fascinating with an organization when they're asking us as a technology provider, where should I be building? How should I be thinking about this? What are the use cases that I should be solving for? And for most organizations, it's determining what is the risk appetite within the organization versus that benefit and the value add you're going to bring to the organization around the innovation. Because we don't know what the legislative and regulatory requirements are necessarily going to be. But there are some pretty traditional standard measures of the risk factors that you can take into consideration. Databricks has a great paper out there if you haven't seen it, the security framework, which gives you the 62 risk factors for AI and agentic systems. We've done it in partnership with NIST and ITIL, and so it's a great way for the organization to start to say, of the 62 factors, by the way, all 62 factors will not apply inside your organization, but of the 62, which do we care about? Which are the ones that we're really concerned about? Which are the ones that we think will preclude us from being as innovative as we can? And so I think when you think about technology, it's not just the bits, the bytes, the platforms that Dael could probably talk about all day and give you the academic perspective, but it is also the practical application. How are you going to make that trade-off within your own organization? And no other organization is going to be the same as yours. So everybody always asks me for the standard framework, where's the criteria, where are the lines? As the data professionals and as the ones who understand sort of these risks, you need to be working with your organizations, including your legal, your security, to make sure they understand the risk versus benefit line and what's acceptable within your own organization.
Just going into Flow Health, and this is one of the interesting things about the build process. So building this agent that could give medical advice was very quick. We spend most of the time working out these evals to make the agent behave in accordance with the values of the company, but also to meet the demands of the regulations. So it was fast agent, more time on all the guardrails, all of these things, and that was, it was non-trivial. One of the things that we're learning is different techniques around this, and anyone who goes and looks at the variety of different ways in which to build evals, it's a smorgasbord. It's actually like one of the craziest science areas ever. There are so many techniques. There are so many different ways. We still, and you know, we work a lot with Anthropic. We still don't know how to read the machine. So the circuitry, the actual models themselves, the mechanistic interpretability, the only breakthroughs that we've had to date are very linear. We kind of figure out what's going on in the neural network from a linear perspective. But we have no idea if there is some kind of magical superposition going on. Because sometimes some of the answers make no sense when you actually model out where these different sort of parts are. So think of like a topic. This thing is made up of lots of topics. Fun fact, every model has a Trump topic, which is weird. But inside these models, they mostly follow a real sort of linear circuit, but sometimes they don't. And we're starting to get better at figuring this out. Why is this important for you in the European Union? Well, we're not in the European Union, we're in the UK, but like we're also in places where legislation tends to happen more and more. But sort of explainability is becoming a real big deal, especially if you're in a regulated area. So being able to trace lineage of like what's going on from the data that's coming in, inputs and outputs, that's step one. More of the catalog players and the lineage graphs can do that, but more and more the inside of the model has to be quite explainable. So what we're starting to do is stabilize those with like primitives. So you have these deterministic tools that an agent can use, which makes it a lot easier. And I'll give you a tangible example later on, but I wanted you to understand that this flow health thing, the build was fast, the testing took a really long time. So we have a lot of work to do as a community to get much better at accelerating that testing. We don't have like a gherkin or chef or puppet, if any of you in the audience are sort of picking up on my cues here. Hudson, Jenkins, we don't have any of that. And I can see a Microsoft person in the room, like my friend over there. He'll be talking about Team City, and he'll be talking about DevOps and ARM templates. None of that exists for AI development yet. We're at the beginning, and this is where the opportunity comes in. Agentic ops, I think, is the biggest opportunity we have, because actually I think it's going to be extremely significant as an area. And I was on a call with a bunch of data engineers, a practice as part of one of the global indexes, and they were all worried about their jobs. Don't worry about your jobs. One of the biggest user groups of our new agent bricks frameworks that are the sort of more automated are the data engineers. They're using it to replace regexes. They're using it to replace very traditional deterministic ways of transforming data. It's entity extraction, all of these things. It's amazing how that kind of groundswell is growing. So I think it's going to lead us to a new persona type in data engineering, which is kind of this bridge between data and AI engineer.
Well, and I think every organization is talking about people in the loop. I mean, how many of you have heard that in your organization? We need to keep people in the loop. The problem is for most organizations, you haven't defined what does it mean to be an AI-enabled person in the loop. And so what are the expectations of the organization? I love your sort of statistic that 2/3 of Databricks employees are not actually using, agentic systems inside the company.
I track this like weekly, and it's insane.
But I find it fascinating because most organizations are measuring how much AI is being used within their organization. In fact, my partner still works at Microsoft. Prior to Databricks, I worked at Microsoft. My partner still works there. And he essentially gets a report. His manager gets a report on how much he is using Copilot to create code as a software engineer. So then my question back to him was like, are they measuring the quality of the code? Like, are you putting crap code in there, but you get AI points and so now you're AI enabled, despite the fact that you haven't improved your productivity? If you're counting lines of code and it's crap code that you're creating, you've improved your productivity, I guess. So for most organizations, it's trying to figure out how are we going to measure the progress of our organization to be an AI-enabled organization. And the interesting part I do find for most organizations is 10 years ago, we all sat through the Data 101 training, right? We're going to be a data-enabled organization, so we all had to sit through the standard data enablement and standard data training. And even today, I will have chief data officers who will say, 98% completion of our data training course. It's like, great. What happened inside the organization? Like, how did that translation happen that they're now data enabled or data led or using data differently to do their roles? Because we just do these high level data courses, AI courses. And with agentic systems, it's no different. We're creating sort of these ecosystems and these processes to help the organization be more productive. But we are not helping people figure out how to get from, let's talk about agents, which most of your organization won't understand, but we'll go and talk to them about it in an AI 101 class, to how they actually translate that into their day-to-day function and their day-to-day role. So for what I'm doing and what I'm flying around the world doing is really helping organizations start to rethink their organizations to say, what are the domains that we have across the organization? Within those domains, what are the personas that we have within that organization? And what does it mean to be AI enabled for that persona? Because your finance partner, your HR partner will be very different than the next generation of data engineers. We will have different expectations, or a software engineer, right? We will have very different expectations of how they're using AI to be more productive. So how do we make sure that we're creating the right enablement that meets those personas where they are today and where we want them to be as an organization, and how are we creating that to help them bridge the gap on how they're going to do their things, or their tasks, their day-to-day tasks, to be able to use these systems. The other thing I'm seeing is organizations not think about the processes. So same as when we all moved from on-prem to the cloud, we essentially took our technical debt from on-prem to the cloud, right? So all we did was move our costs from CapEx to OpEx. We have a bunch of garbage and legacy systems that now exist in a hyperscaler as opposed to your on-prem data centers, but it didn't actually help you modernize. You essentially migrated from one ecosystem to the other. And I'm finding Agentic to be the very same, right? For most organizations, they will say, we have this 127-step process to intake a net new customer, but we now have an agent that can do the 127 steps. It's like, did we think about what the agent could do to help us cut the 127 steps down to 3, right? And so I think for many, many organizations, when they're thinking about the value proposition that Agentic can represent for them, they're having to think about their personas and what they're trying to actually achieve. What is the aspirational AI enablement it means for them? And then how do you translate that into their day-to-day tasks and processes that they're having to do? And how are you going to use Agentic systems to help them minimize and mitigate that? So what are you seeing as you were starting to look at some of the systems that you're building? I mean, I know you've been playing with this now for months inside of Databricks and using it, so I would love to hear what you're seeing in that.
Yeah, I've got a lot more sleep, but I've also been waking up a lot earlier in the morning to write like weird code. So we decided to do, we were very fortunate, Databricks was, to have Jamie Dimon speak at our summit. And I encourage everyone to go kind of listen to that recording. Got a little political at certain points, but there were specific lines that were very interesting. So one thing in particular, how many people in the audience remember off the back of 2008 how all the banks suddenly had to do stress exits on liquidity and credit risks? Show of hands? Right. So between 2008 and 2015, building a stress testing Monte Carlo simulation was hundreds of millions of dollars to most banks. It was like some crazy amount of infrastructure they had to invest in. I know a bank that has a 49 terabyte in-memory grid just for running these in-memory calculations. One of the litigated parts was like the Fed mandating people do the seeker thing every year. Now, one of the funny things that Jamie Dimon said on stage was, we do hundreds of stress tests a week. We could give a damn about Seeker, which is a yearly test. And he had spoken at length about Silicon Valley Bank and some of the other banks that went under. So we looked at this and we thought, okay, well, we know that he's running these hundreds a week. You know, yes, they are JPMCs, so they are, you know, they do have cash, but surely they still like to keep the bottom line low. So we went and had a look how they've provisioned that system. And what we found was really remarkable. So we decided to emulate and abstract, generalize that provisioning. And we thought, let's apply it to an alternative network. So there was an MIT paper in 2015 written by a serious sort of heavyweight in the supply chain environment. And what he did was he designed a set of algorithms, deterministic algorithms, for monitoring a supply chain network and looking at time to recover and time to survive. So imagine tariffs get imposed, or there's trade discrepancies, or there is a pandemic, or there is a ship gets stuck in the Suez Canal, or there's a factory fire. You know, all of these, I think they're reasonable now. So we thought, how quickly could a small team reproduce this paper? And that was our kind of hypothesis. So 2 AI engineers and a rusty CTO coder built this, reproduced the paper in 20 days. 20 days. We published it, we open sourced the notebooks. We then decided, okay, most supply chain managers struggle with general maths. You know, this is still complicated. So we started to write a series of agents, 5 agents in total, that could reason through this primitive tooling that generated the maths. And the accuracy is insane. So we can run a complex network in 38 minutes and we can profile this network using these primitive tools. We could do it for less than $1, and then we built a set of reasoning agents that sat on top that reason through this and basically give directionality and planning to these supply chain managers. All open sourced. The second blog is coming out in the next few days. But this is, the second part took 8 days. So 28 days in total to build this thing end to end. A team of 3. That is redefining process in a way that is remarkable. Now, it doesn't mean people are redundant. It means they're going on to doing better jobs. Doesn't take away the job of a supply chain manager. It just takes away the guesswork. And to me, that is one of the most remarkable benefits that I've sort of seen play out in terms of how this lands in process and how it democratizes a lot of these very, very deep expertise skills to people that are in these jobs. That is one of the most fundamental things I've seen. This runs on all 3 clouds too, just by the way. It's fully portable.
Was that your sales pitch for the solution? Maybe?
Multi-cloud's a thing.
So I do think it's fascinating that despite the fact that you had a team of 3, the last step of the process really was getting it in the hands of the users. I had the opportunity to be in Southwest Florida last week. Do not recommend that during hurricane season, by the way, but that's where our sales team decided to do their offsite for the quarter. And interestingly, the second day of the session was all of us had to create a Glean agent that was going to solve one of the sales process issues that we had internally. So we had our technical pre-sales and our actual field-facing sellers who were essentially within half an hour building Glean agents that would help them do things like scrape the CRM system to see where there was not a partner attached to a specific opportunity, find a use case that potentially was stalled because of a technical product issue, and could we start to aggregate? Instead of having our sales teams having to collectively, manually go to each other to try to identify those things, within 30 minutes, and these are all managers, by the way, they're not even like our frontline hands-on keyboard resource, solution architects, who would be brilliant, and I know they could do it, but these were managers that were creating Glean agents within 30 minutes to solve some of these manual tasks that they were trying to do. And I think that's where we really start to see the power of how do we think about the personas and the things and the tasks and the processes that they're trying to do. And while we'll have great technical resources on the back end, because we have the platform and the systems and tools in place, how do we make sure that we're enabling the front line, the supply chain managers, the bank managers that have to test this, et cetera? How do we make sure that they have the power of that in their hands and that we're giving them the capabilities and most of the time it's the free time to be able to think about the things that they're going through. And for many, many organizations, I'm finding it's the other thing is that everybody's worried about failure on an agent, I have to admit. And so it's precluding them from being innovative, from doing this sort of testing. Freeing up 3 resources for 20 days still requires an investment on the part of leadership. And so how do we start to build an ecosystem, an innovation ecosystem that allows us to test in this space, to solve for some of these problems in the organization and get buy-in? It's lovely when your CEO says, we will, and it's lovely when people on the ground are trying to, but how do we make sure that the entire organization is being supportive of an environment that allows you to take the risk and solve for some of these process issues?
The thing that I find the most entertaining is the resistance from the organization, even in some of the most innovative organizations. People have to use these things every day. But the thing is, so there was a paper that came out recently. Does anyone follow Ethan Mollick? He brought out a paper recently which was the garbage can versus the bitter truth. So let me frame what the garbage can means. The garbage can was a Ruth-Ann Hussing study where she looked at process and these, what I jokingly call the oversimplified distortion of a process, right? So we have a sales process, which is 6 stages. Identification, live. That's 1, that's 6. And there's other things that happen in between. The reality is that the average time is about 254 days between those 6 steps. So that is not representative of the task level. So remember what I said about agents being autonomous over a task. We have no idea what the tasks are. So what she found in her study was there is hundreds of thousands of tasks that take place to execute on the 6-stage process. And about 80% of them are just working around the organizational politics, the organizational dynamics, getting approvals, back and forth, finding space in people's diaries. All of these are just a set of activities that take place, set of tasks that take place. And if you reduce that by just the 20 that is value, and this is value stream mapping, this has been done for many years, Lean Toyota, that kind of thing, what we found is actually the true process is incredibly short and incredibly effective. And the reason why software engineers are doing so well with this is because they've been using Kanban and they've been using these tools at a task level for many years. So the detail of how they work is very well documented. The detail of how a lot of other roles, none of it's documented. Like it just doesn't exist on any form of paper and stuff. So I think that is one of the biggest areas where we've sort of seen, how do we make these agents full and do these things? So let me get on to the second half of that paper, which is kind of cool. A little bit scary, but kind of cool. The bitter truth speaks about models and the model approach. So one of the things, I'll use the example of AlphaGo. AlphaGo, trained on 2,000 years of Go knowledge, beats the world Go champion. How many of you know about AlphaZero? Anyone? Cool. AlphaZero, unsupervised, beats AlphaGo. Learns the rules on its own, no knowledge of Go beforehand, actually becomes an expert at other games too. So the bitter truth, written by Richard Sutton in 2019, which is well worth reading, is these models are better at process design than we are. So potentially that is an opportunity for us to actually design and reimagine the processes, but have better tools for doing it. And to do it in a far more clean way and cut out some of this back and forth, which I think would make us all far better at what we do. The other thing is we have much bigger problems to solve. Are all our organizations growing at 60% year on year with, really, really trimmed bottom lines and expanding into many, many other countries? No. So there is a huge amount of upside to kind of figuring out how this all works, but also creating a job that you love. And I'm not kidding. I find these tools frustrating as hell. It's like parenting, but they are incredibly effective at doing things in a remarkable way. Andre Karpathy calls it jagged intelligence. It's like amazing, 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 can't spell strawberry. So you have to be quite tolerant of the fact that it's like telling your kid not to climb up the shelf. Don't do it, don't do it. Okay, well then you fell. Okay, cool. Well, so it is very much like that. There is very much, if you've managed large teams, it feels a lot like that too. If you manage graduates, it feels a lot like that too. So it's just one of those things that we all have the skill, we just haven't directed it in this way. And I've just found this, the last 6 months of playing around with this stuff and really kind of doing it with anger, solving big problems inside. I can't talk about the inside. Privately, I will. But the outside, some of the really fascinating, new processes have just been remarkable. But lots to do. And remember, we're in year 3. Software was in year 30 when it achieved the same sort of trajectory. So we got a lot of work to do.
So I mean, this is probably the least technical Databricks pitch you've ever seen in your entire life. I have to admit, though, we do believe that there is a balance between the technology and the tools and the systems that we're creating at Databricks to help you versus the how do we make sure we're also supporting you with the people, the process, the change management, the organizational design, best practices, all of those other things that we know. Everybody can take pictures now. This is my only slide that actually has any sort of words on it. But we do think that we would love to have you stop by the booth. The team can actually show you some of the agentic systems we've built into the ecosystem, into the platform to help you build agents inside of your organization, particularly as Dael talked about. How do we make sure we're helping solve for the eval issue? We think that's the biggest thing facing most organizations. So how do we start to think about agentic systems that are compound agents? How do you start to put those together? How do you decide what's an acceptable risk that you're willing to take within the organization? Because again, people make mistakes and so do computers. And so how do you make sure that you're defining that for the organizations? How do we help you think about the personas? I know many of you probably saw our announcements around AI, BI, Databricks One. We are trying to help you figure out how do we capture some of our non-data professional personas across your organization. We know your finance team is going to give up Excel from their cold, dead fingers. Like, how do we make sure that we're helping you take them through that journey to make sure that that happens? And then disrupt your historical processes, just like Dael was just talking about. We know that this gives us a unique capability within your organization to help you drive these complex processes, simplify them, rethink the existing processes. We just think agentic systems represent a fascinating time in history right now, and we would love to partner with you and help you do that. Is there anything?
I think there's a good way to kind of think about this working backwards. So mapping out their historical process, I'm finding that that is increasingly becoming a really useful technique to do. Then you focus on the persona. So what is that persona doing in terms of activity? How much of the actual institutional knowledge goes into a system of record versus retained in that person's head? And how do we make that far more of an interactive approach? And then moving into the agentic behavior, there's a lot of grounded principles and grounded ways of working that have to be baked into these evals. Evals are not like the simplest things to build. There's a huge amount of science that goes into it. I think one of the things we're trying to do is build a new agent brick so agent bricks are these different building blocks that allow you to build agents. We have 4 at the moment. 2 are more autonomous, 2 are more interactive. But what we're starting to find is that there are going to be these stabilizing agent bricks, these evals that kind of can be developed. There's also going to be orchestrating agent bricks, ones that allow for sort of non-deterministic, non-linear workflow. Because I don't know, I've been doing work in the enterprise for sort of 30 years, and I've never, ever gone in a straight line. So we actually have to be accommodating on non-linearity. We have to be accommodating on a lot of new principles. I think for me, one of the biggest things is we talk a lot about change management. Robin and I are big advocates for it. I think this is changing how we manage, so change in management too. And I think that is going to be one of the most fundamentally hard things to solve. If I have an individual contributor in my business that is managing a fleet of agents, and they're part of a team, each with their respective fleets, and then I have to manage what does that even look like? That can't be a hierarchy. That's not going to work. I don't even know if that could be a matrix. So what are we going to do from a management and organizational kind of setup and framework perspective to be able to do this? We haven't solved any of these problems. So lots to do, lots of excitement.
And I don't think any organization is going to get rid of that whole level and displace them with agentic systems. So as your organization is worried about my job is going away, trust me, it is not going away. You need them to decipher each of these levels and trying to work from that backward to the forward.
Thank you very much for listening to us today. And I think we're done.
We gave you 5 extra minutes to get to the next session so that we didn't watch you all
I don't know if we can do
exit,
questions. Anyone have any questions?
I don't know if we can take.
You'll have to. Do you have a mic? Cool. Here's one.
Hi, my name is Gagan. Thank you. It was a very inspiring talk. I have a question regarding the solution chain, supply chain optimization thing that you've talked about. So where did you get the data from? Is it open source data that you use, and how did you compare to see that the accuracy has increased?
So we have a lot of, we had to simulate a lot of data. There are non-public references for customers where we've been doing this. Okay, so this is not like just a skunk works, throw it in the sky and hope for rain. We built this in lockstep with a couple of significant companies, like large CPG providers. They wanted to put more resilience in place. They wanted to be able to predict where there was going to be problems, and they wanted to make it a lot simpler. So that was kind of the mandate. the fact that it was built so quickly was quite surprising to us. The fact that we could source the data was by them having a pretty good sort of data platform already in place with a catalog to make the data more accessible. So that actually simplified things. We did have to propagate a sort of graph of the network. That is still something we're testing to sort of work out, is it accurate? Is it sort of representative of the world that they have? So sort of kind of digital twinning, but we're trying to propagate a graph rather than build it using a graph DB. Anyone who's ever built a graph knows creation and maintenance is awful. So what we've been doing is like using that as a kind of tear down restore. But the underlying data comes from the catalog that we're able to access, where the supply chain data has already been organized. You'll be super surprised as to how much we have to synthesize to fill in the gaps. Because if you imagine, most supply chains have these kind of transaction points. So you don't have like all of the in-between. You also don't have all of the tasks that are done in each stage along it. So lots of kind of data work has been ongoing, but the actual mapping and this running these tests and running these, it's like remarkable how quickly you can do it. In each product line, you can literally run it across each product line because each of them have different kind of network structures. We're adding enhancements to it at the moment, like location being a huge sort of enhancement, knowing about like centrality, where are their bottlenecks and things. Those are sort of additional things. So we're just going to keep adding features to it. But yeah, it's like you can't really do this unless you actually have an established data platform where the data's been unlocked from the disparate systems.
Dael.
Hi, this is Krish. I've got two questions related to agent breaks. One is with agent AI, the problem that I see is like if you build a pipeline, if something goes wrong, you know where to fix it and how to fix it. But with agents, there is a lot of unknowns. I mean, people call it black box as well. So how do you see that evolving? And secondly, from the business perspective, they care about the output. If the output goes wrong, they will immediately get away from it. So there is still lack of mechanism by which you give a confidence factor of the output so that you can tell business, okay, this is 80%, 90%, 50%, and then depending upon the use case, they can use it. So how do you see these two things evolving, or have you seen that in other industries?
Okay, so one of the things I talked about, probably not as much as evals, was tracing. So in Databricks' monitoring framework, which is called Lakehouse Monitoring, we capture all of that trace. That backs on to ML flow tracing. So ML flow being an open source tool that we donated about 7-8 years ago. We're able to, because of that kind of discipline, we've been doing this with machine learning models for a long time, we capture the trace. The trace actually gives us a lot of the inputs and the outputs. One of the problems we're still trying to solve is what happens inside the model. The model itself is a problem, and that's why this Anthropic work around circuitry and mechanistic interpretability is so promising. The problem, obviously, if these are, black box provider models, so foundation models and things like that, you're not going to actually get that. So what we're starting to see is if there is a need for explainability and transparency, we shift more to the open source models, true open source, not necessarily the kind of weights open source. But one of the other things that we're starting to see is there's so many models that are coming out, and there's so many techniques to enhance models. A little trickier with reasoning models, but increasingly, because we can trace the lineage of what the data is doing, and we can actually capture the stack trace of what the model's behavior is, and we can capture the outputs, you can start to derive what that explainability is without actually necessarily needing to know everything inside the black box. Ironically, this was revealed to me yesterday from a electrical engineer that we've been doing this with circuits for many years. We treat the circuit as a black box. So I think that there's something in your tolerance and your threshold for it being right. having these deterministic tools that are well tested, like the ones I explained, the Monte Carlo simulations that we're running, they create stability, and you have the reasoning on top of those. So I think there's an application architecture starting to form off the base of a catalog that actually I think is one of the most fascinating areas. It actually takes me back to like some of Martin Fowler's work, you know, when he created integration patterns and some of the Gang of Four work in the 1990s. I think we're about to enter that era of agentic pattern design.
And the last question, in terms of accountability, if something goes wrong, I can make you accountable. But in case of agents, where do you think?
Okay, so we just published a paper on this. Accountability, you say that a human's accountable. In the 2008 financial crash, no human went to jail. No one was accountable. Lots of people lost their homes. I think there's this notion of an accountability sink where there are policies that are accountable, not humans. That exists in systems today. So accountability is a problem we have to solve in a management framework as well as in an agentic framework. It's not a solved problem.
I would maybe add that for most organizations where you've defined that with the business, it's because you took the business along with you on the journey, as opposed to you creating a data product or an agent and delivering it to the business, making sure that you're bringing them from the very beginning. And a lot of times then the argument about the accuracy, right, how often is it wrong, a lot of that will go away because they've been part of the process from the very beginning. Yeah, but the new hire also is going to answer the question wrong for the or even people that have been there for the whole time. But yeah, it's a change management people issue as well.
Okay, things just gone red. We're getting kicked off the stage. It's been wonderful to see you all today.
We will be at the booth. We'd love to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time with us this morning.
Thank you.